A fire in a European parcel hub exposed an explosive device that was scheduled to be loaded into the cargo hold of a transatlantic passenger flight. Western security services say this was not a one-off accident. They say it was part of a wider pattern in which Moscow tests how much risk it can push into the systems that keep our lives running. The same state that invaded Ukraine is now touching parcel networks, aviation routes, and oil shipping lanes that support the global economy. What began as a land invasion is now pushing into global supply. It is hurting aviation security and is going after shipping, insurance, and energy markets. That means your deliveries, your flights, and your fuel bills are now part of this story. Security services describe three connected fronts where this pressure is already visible. First, suspicious incidents in European parcel hubs at the core of NATO's supply chain. Second, an air fleet pushed past safe limits, flying aircraft that belong in museums. And third, a shadow fleet of tankers carrying sanctioned oil through high-risk shipping lanes. To see how they fit together, start with the parcel fires. That almost created a major aviation disaster. Ever more obvious, it is today that Russia is not just at war with Ukraine. Russia is at war with us. My name is Jason Smart. I'm a special correspondent for the Kyiv Post and National Security Advisor. The Russians truly are at war with the West, not just with Ukraine. So let's look at that. What's really going on? But first, help us get this message to more people. The truth of what's going on here in Ukraine and what's really happening in Russia. All I ask you to do is please subscribe to this video, share it with others, leave your comments below, and consider becoming a channel member. So European parcel hubs are the first front where this strategy appears. In late 2024 and early 2025, we have seen DHL facilities in Germany and in the UK be attacked in this way. These hubs process millions of parcels per day. They feed flights that crisscross Europe and the Atlantic, moving medicine, consumer goods, and business cargo. When they are disrupted, you get supply chain disruption, delayed deliveries, and higher cost for logistics companies and their consumers. Now, investigators opened the burned parcels and found something different. The devices were built around magnesium-based incendiaries. They were disguised as harmless electric massage pillows. But in fact, magnesium burns at around 3,100 degrees Celsius, 5,600 degrees Fahrenheit. That heat can soften and then liquefy the aluminum skin of a wide-body jet in under 1 minute. Incredibly, aviation fire suppression systems are not built for this kind of threat. Cargo-based systems are designed to suffocate fuel and plastic fire. A magnesium core behaves like a miniature star, burning at extreme temperatures. Once it starts, standard fire suppression systems are largely ineffective. For airlines and regulators focused on aviation security, that is a nightmare scenario. The timing of this device being put on this airplane shows how close and how narrowly we escaped disaster. The incendiaries ignited on sorting belts and in warehouse areas before they were loaded. If the timers had been set just a few hours later, ignition would have happened at about 9,000 meters or about 30,000 feet. Just imagine, above the Atlantic, these explosions. The discussion today could be about an aviation disaster on the scale of Lockerbie, not about a warehouse fire. European security services traced this pattern to Russian military intelligence. They pointed to the same GRU structures that previously ran poisonings and depot explosions in Europe. These structures now use logistics infrastructure instead of direct attacks. They recruit disposable young men online. They pay them in cryptocurrency. They instruct them to drop the parcels and then just walk away. The method is simple, deniable, and scalable. Each recruit handles only a small part of the operation. The device moves through normal parcels until the timer activates. The cost to Moscow is low, and the risk is pushed onto the airlines, the logistics firms, and ultimately the passengers. On paper, it looks like an accident inside of a complex system. In practice, it is a test of how much disruption Western infrastructure will tolerate. These parcel plots sit inside of a wider campaign of hybrid sabotage. Saboteurs have tried to damage rail lines in Poland and in the Baltic states. They do this to disrupt the ammunition and the fuel that travels to Ukraine. Undersea cables in the Baltic Sea and the North Sea have failed soon after Russian-linked ships have passed overhead. Everything that connects Western societies from data to freight is being tested as potential pressure points. The targets are not tanks. They are the arteries and the nerves of European infrastructure. There is a precedent, though, for this pattern of behavior. It is not the first time. Libya's leadership made this choice when Pan Am Flight 103 was destroyed over Scotland. Syria's leadership flirted with similar proxy violence when its conventional options had already failed. Today, the Kremlin is adapting that logic to a world of automated parcel hubs and cargo tracking codes. Russia's sabotage campaign against Europe targets the nervous system of modern life. These attacks are something that Russia will only continue. The question, though, is whether or not Moscow will be allowed to continue doing this, or whether Western governments will finally call this warfare. There is irony, though. At the same time that Russia is seeking to destroy Western airplanes, take a look at what we see with Russia's air fleet. That is the second front, where we see decay, sanctions, and denial all collide at one time. On December 9th, just yesterday, an Antonov AN-22, an anti-transport aircraft, crashed near the village of Ivankova. Ivankova is about 250 kilometers, 155 miles northeast of Moscow. That plane has been flying since the 1960s. What's incredible is that in any normal Air Force, an aircraft like this would sit in a museum. It would not be actively hauling cargo on active routes. But official statements after the crash sounded familiar and also vague. Spokesman spoke of a technical malfunction during a test flight after repairs. They did not discuss structural fatigue in the aircraft. They did not mention missing parts. They offered no open discussion of how many such relics are still flying. The language on paper stays calm, but in fact, we look at the disaster after disaster mounting up. Engineers inside of Russia talk about a ball-bearing famine. Modern aircraft depend on high-grade bearings in engines and control systems. They also depend on avionics produced by specialized firms across the democratic world. After the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, sanctions and export controls cut Russia off from much of the global supply. Parts that came through third countries cost more and fail more often. That pressure on these parts is now a structural weakness for Russia, but moreover, is a weakness for every country that allows Russia's aviation to fly over its territory. But the response to this, the lack of goods within Russia, has been cannibalization. Mechanics strip grounded Airbuses and Boeings for usable components. Older transports, they donate parts so that a small group of priority aircraft can remain barely airworthy. Maintenance cycles stretch as engineers wait for parts that may or may not ever arrive. Inspections are rushed to keep aircraft flying. Every flight moves one step further away from accepted safety norms. Now, we have seen this before, though, when we look at Soviet military history. Late Soviet industry kept unsafe submarines and warships in service to meet quotas and satisfy political demands. The submarine, Kosmolets, later the Kursk, were lost in part because the crew hid defects instead of reporting them. The same instinct now hides cracked struts and failing systems inside of Russia's modern aircraft. The incentive is to sign the form, not to ground the aircraft. Russian linked transports are failing beyond Russia's borders as well. We saw Aviation 76 heavy lifter associated with the Russian operations that crashed in Sudan. They were there to support the mercenary activities there. These aircraft faced rough runways, extreme heat, and minimal support infrastructure. Pilots fly them like old trucks through a minefield, hoping that the axles will hold. And when incidents happen in such conditions, they increase insurance cost and operational risk across an already fragile region. The pattern in the skies is straightforward. Sanctions have pushed Russia into an aviation infrastructure failure. Museum-age aircraft continue to fly because Russia has no fewer options. Russia today is in a situation where it can do very little about this. A war machine that lies about maintenance does not only stumble at the front, it eventually falls out of the sky at home. When admitting a defect is punished, every checklist becomes a political document. That same culture then looks to the sea, where ships and tankers can still move money even as aircraft and airports become harder to sustain. At sea, Russia's shadow fleet shows the same decomposition and the financial distress that we saw everywhere else. We see the shadow fleet is Russia's illicit cash pipeline, and today is becoming ever more fragile. Dozens of aging tankers and bulkers, many of them older than 20 or 25 years, with fake ownership and fake documents, continue on these routes. But today, Ukraine's strategy at the sea has evolved in response. It has moved from chasing individual ships to attacking the unit economics of each voyage. Naval drones have struck tankers such as the Kairos and the Vidorat near their Black Sea routes. One damaged tanker drifted near the Bulgarian coast. That drift was visible proof that this trade now carries physical risk as well as legal risk. For ports and coastal states, each incident raises questions about environmental damage and regional security. Insurance markets reacted the only way that they can. War risk premiums for Black Sea routes have climbed, and in some cases, roughly tripling compared to pre-war levels. For ship owners, that premium is the price of gambling with a ship and its crew. Insurers in London and Singapore do not want to have anything to do with this. Today, we have more and more problems for those wishing to use Black Sea. And the reason we have those problems is because of Moscow. But the financial picture that emerges is ugly for Moscow itself. Russian crude often sells at a discount to Brent crude. That's done in order to attract buyers willing to ignore the sanctions. On top of that discount, we see something else. Shipping firms must pay higher war risk premiums. They must pay higher freight rates. They must cover higher costs for sanction evasion. The result is a squeeze on profits that slowly chokes Moscow's war cash and erodes its net profit margins. Grain smuggling now follows the exact same logic. We see that Russia today takes more risk to ship grain than it ever has before. Now, if you look back in history, we've seen these sort of things happen before. Look at apartheid South Africa. They used shadow tankers and shell companies to import oil despite the embargoes. As sabotage risk grew and insurers started to pull their support, the cost began to explode. The regime's strategic choices began to narrow. Russia's shadow fleet today sails a similar narrowing channel between sanctions and physical danger. And when a state runs out of safe routes, it accelerates into its own risk. It starts gambling with civilian lives instead of its own assets. Naval drones in the Black Sea, higher war risk premiums, and seized ships are all steps in that gambling habit. For those who don't realize it, though, what's incredible is this part of a structural problem. This is not just a one-off. Consider that inside the Russian command, that reluctance that we've seen has a name. It's called Vranyo. Vranyo is the art of lying upwards. It's the lie that you tell your boss. He pretends to believe you. Lies replace reality. In that environment, reporting a problem becomes more dangerous than ignoring it. Officials and officers report successes even when they know they have failed. Today, superiors act as if they believe them because, well, their careers depend on it. They have to report good news. But this kind of system, reality becomes a threat. Today, statistics, maps, maintenance logs become tools to manage perceptions and not reflect the truth. And at the front, this creates what Russian soldiers and bloggers call liberation on credit. A commander reported that a village or industrial site is liberated before it's actually secured. Medals are handed out, press releases say that everything has been great and there's been a huge victory. But afterward, the troops are pushed into frontal attacks to make that report true. Accounts from the Kupiansk sector show how lethal this can be. Russian units briefly entered buildings such as a sugar factory as well as a feed mill near the contested area. On headquarters maps, that small foothold turned into a fully controlled zone. However, Ukrainian artillery and drones, they still covered the ground there. This was not any sort of a victory. But if we look back in history, we've seen this before. In World War I, reports that hid shortages and defeats from Tsar Nicholas II helped bring about the collapse of 1917. In Afghanistan in the 1980s, glowing reports of stabilized provinces hid the reality of ambushes and desertions. And in each case, leaders who navigated by lies steered their states towards disaster. Today, the same lying maps guide Moscow. It shows victories where there are none. It shows safe routes where there's in fact fire. It shows stability where there is decay. The result is heavy losses at the front, covert explosive devices blowing up in NATO airspace, and reckless voyages by old tankers through contested waters. Today, Russia is becoming an ever more unstable state. Concerning today that Russia is openly waging war against the West, openly trying to blow up airplanes in our own airspace. At what point do we call this a war against the West? We must understand that Vladimir Putin believes he is already at war with NATO. He believes what is currently occurring with the NATO countries helping Ukraine, that there is an active war, that this, in his words, is a proxy war. So if we believe that he understands this, that he is in a war, we should react to it as such. We should react to the fact that he believes that he's waging war, and so we must respond, not sit idly. This is not just about Ukraine. It's about a global war that Vladimir Putin currently believes that he is fighting. But today, as an empire declines, it often becomes more dangerous. This regime has already shown that it is willing to test explosive devices in the cargo systems of planes that keep the modern world connected. The question is no longer whether this system will crash. This question today is different. It's whether we move out of this path before there's an impact. Thank you for watching. Please like this video, subscribe to this channel, and consider becoming a channel member today. And please do see the first pinned comment below, right below the question of the day, which you can respond to, about how you too can help the Ukrainian soldiers to get life-saving drones and other support. As always, thank you for supporting Ukraine.